The radio crackle came at 3:47 hours, a voice stripped bare of everything except terror. Forward Operating Base Kalsu's Operations Center went silent as the transmission broke through the routine chatter of a Thursday night in Diyala Province. The voice belonged to Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb, and he was whispering. Not because tactical protocol demanded it, but because 27 insurgents were 70 meters from his position, and his team of 4 Marines had exactly 19 rounds left between them. The medevac helicopter that was supposed to extract his wounded teammate had taken RPG fire and diverted. The quick reaction force was pinned down 6 clicks south. Webb's GPS coordinates placed him in a dried riverbed called the Serpent's Throat, where 3 previous rescue attempts had failed in the last 11 months. He keyed his radio one more time, his voice barely audible over the wind scraping across the desert floor. Any station, this is Phantom 2-1. We are combat ineffective. Request immediate close air support. I say again, immediate CAS. We've got maybe 10 minutes. The Air Operations Center at Balad copied the transmission and began running through available assets. 2 F-16s were refueling over Kurdistan. An Apache gunship was rearming after a firefight near Ramadi. Then a voice cut through the frequency, calm and precise, with the faintest rasp of someone who had already been airborne for 3 hours. Phantom 2-1, this is Reaper 3-6. Playtime approximately 40 mics. I'm 15 minutes out. Can you mark your position? Webb felt something unlock in his chest, something between hope and disbelief. An A-10 Thunderbolt, the Warthog, the ugliest, slowest, most beautiful aircraft ever designed for one singular purpose, keeping people like him alive. He popped yellow smoke, and the wind carried it east in a thin ribbon against the pre-dawn darkness. What Webb didn't know, what nobody monitoring that frequency could have guessed, was that the pilot inbound to save his life had been told, 6 months earlier, that she didn't belong in a cockpit. That her call sign, Reaper, was given as a joke by men who assumed she'd wash out during her first combat rotation. That she'd logged more danger-close gun runs than any pilot in her squadron, and still got questioned in every briefing about whether she could handle the stress. Her name was Captain Ellery Vale. She had flown 63 combat sorties. She had a scar across her knuckles from a hydraulic malfunction over Helmand Province. And tonight, she was about to turn skepticism into silence, 130 round at a time. The Warthog's engines growled as she pushed the throttle forward, descending through 18,000 feet. In the cockpit, the instruments glowed pale green against her visor. She checked her GAU-8 Avenger cannon, 1,100 rounds of depleted uranium, enough to shred light armor and turn insurgent positions into smoking craters. Her targeting pod swiveled, scanning the grid coordinates Webb had transmitted. She could see the heat signatures now, dozens of them, moving in coordinated flanking patterns, professional, disciplined, dangerous. Webb's 4 Marines were clustered in a shallow depression, their thermal silhouettes faint and still. She toggled her radio. Phantom 2-1, Reaper 3-6. I have visual on your position and multiple hostiles closing from the north and east. Danger close. Confirm your heads down. Webb pressed his face into the dirt. Confirmed, Reaper. We're as low as we can get. Please tell me you've done this before. Ellery's jaw tightened. She'd done it 47 times. She just hadn't done it with half the squadron betting she'd flinch. Copy, Phantom. Stand by. She rolled the A-10 into a 30-degree dive, the ground rushing up in shades of gray and black. The Warthog wasn't graceful. It didn't need to be. It was a flying gun with wings bolted on as an afterthought, and right now that was exactly what Webb needed. The targeting reticle settled over the northern cluster of heat signatures. Ellery's thumb hovered over the trigger. Her breath slowed. Her heartbeat steadied. And then she fired. The sound of the GAU-8 wasn't a roar, it was a chainsaw ripping through sheet metal. A guttural brrrrrt that echoed across the desert like the voice of something ancient and pitiless. 30-millimeter rounds tore into the earth at 65 per second, each one the size of a milk bottle, moving faster than sound. The insurgents advancing on Webb's position disappeared in a line of exploding dirt and shredded vegetation. Ellery pulled up hard, her G-suit squeezing her legs as the warthog climbed. She banked left, eyes scanning for secondary targets. The eastern group was scattering, but they were still armed, still dangerous. She toggled her radio. Phantom, rounds complete on northern contact. Assessing eastern group. How copy? Webb's voice came back shaky with adrenaline. Good hits, Reaper, good hits. They're falling back. But they weren't falling back far enough. Ellery watched through her targeting pod as a cluster of insurgents regrouped behind a low ridge, setting up what looked like a heavy machine gun. They were adapting, learning. That made them more dangerous. She armed a pair of Mark 82 500-pound bombs and adjusted her approach vector. The A-10 shuddered slightly as she descended again, slower this time, giving herself a clearer firing solution. The ridge came into focus. She could see muzzle flashes now, tracers arcing toward Webb's position in lazy green streaks. One of the Marines was returning fire, short controlled bursts that wouldn't last long. Ellery pickled the bombs at 4,200 feet. They fell in silence, two dark shapes tumbling through the night, and then the ridge erupted in twin fireballs that turned the darkness into brief, savage daylight. The shockwave rolled across the desert floor. Dust and debris fountained upward. When the smoke cleared, the machine gun was gone. So was the ridge. Webb keyed his radio, his voice thick with something close to reverence. Reaper 3-6, that was. Jesus, thank you. Ellery didn't respond immediately. She was already scanning for threats, cycling through her systems, checking fuel levels. 40 minutes of playtime meant she had maybe 25 left before she'd have to break station. But the fight wasn't over. Her targeting pod caught movement 300 meters southmore heat signatures, moving fast. A truck, technical by the looks of it, with a heavy weapon mounted in the bed. It was heading straight for Webb's position. She toggled her cannon again. Phantom, I've got a technical inbound from your 6 o'clock. Stay down. She rolled into another gun run, the warthog's nose dropping as she lined up the shot. The technical was moving erratically, the driver aware of her presence. Smart. That made it harder. She compensated for the movement, leading the target, waiting for the reticle to settle. The trigger broke smooth and clean. The GAU-8 roared again, and the technical disintegrated in a spray of metal and fire. The chassis flipped sideways, wheels spinning uselessly as it rolled to a stop. The heavy weapon, a DSHK by the look of it, was sheared clean off the mount. Ellery pulled up, breathing hard now, adrenaline singing through her veins. Her hands were steady on the stick, but her heart was hammering. She'd done this dozens of times, but it never stopped being personal. Every trigger pull was a life saved, a family that wouldn't get a folded flag. She checked her fuel. 18 minutes of playtime left. She toggled the radio. Phantom 2-1, Reaper 3-6. I'm showing no further immediate contacts. QRF is 5 minutes out. Can you hold? Webb's reply was instant. We can hold, Reaper, thanks to you. There was a pause, then Webb's voice came back quieter, almost hesitant. Hey, Reaper, you sound different than I expected. Ellery's expression didn't change, but something cold settled in her chest. She'd heard variations of that line before, in briefing rooms, at the O Club, from senior officers who smiled while questioning her readiness. She kept her voice flat, professional. Copy, Phantom, different how? Another pause, longer this time. Then Webb said, I don't know, I just didn't expect a woman, not out here, not doing this. The words hung in the cockpit like smoke. Ellery's hand tightened on the stick. She could have said a lot of things. Could have reminded him that she just saved his life. That gender didn't matter when you were putting 30mm rounds on target. That she'd earned her wings the same way every pilot did, through skill, grit, and blood. Instead, she said, your QRF is 3 minutes out, Phantom. I'll maintain overwatch until they reach you. Reaper out. She switched frequencies before he could respond. Below her, the desert stretched out in endless shades of gray. The fires from her bomb strikes were still burning, small orange dots against the darkness. She circled wide, eyes scanning, professional to the core. But inside, the old familiar weight settled over her shoulders, the weight of proving herself, again, and again, and again. She'd been the top graduate in her flight school class. She'd scored expert on every weapons qualification. She'd flown missions that made seasoned pilots nervous. And still, every time she keyed her radio, Someone was surprised by her voice. Every time she walked into a ready room, someone assumed she was lost. Every time she dropped ordnance danger close and saved lives, someone found a way to make it about everything except her skill. Her call sign Reaper had started as mockery, a joke from her first squadron commander, who'd smiled and said she looked too soft to handle the Warthog's violence. Now she wore it like armor. Let them underestimate her. Let them doubt. She'd prove them wrong one gun run at a time. The QRF reached Webb's position 4 minutes later, 3 armored Humvees bristling with firepower, medics scrambling to treat the wounded Marine. Ellery maintained her orbit, watching through her targeting pod as Webb's team was loaded up, as the vehicles turned and began the slow journey back to base. Only then did she climb to altitude, turning northwest toward Balad. The flight back was quiet. Just the steady hum of the engines, the glow of the instrument panel, the vast darkness beyond the canopy. She thought about Webb's surprise, about the pause before he said thank you, about how many times she'd have to save lives before people stopped being shocked that she could. The tower at Balad cleared her for landing. The Warthog touched down with its characteristic thud, ungraceful and solid. She taxied to the hardstand, killed the engines, and sat for a moment in the sudden silence. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was calm. She'd done her job. She'd done it well. She climbed out of the cockpit, her flight suit soaked with sweat, her legs stiff from 3 hours strapped into the ejection seat. The crew chief was waiting, a young airman named Rodriguez who grinned as she approached. "Good hunting, Captain." Ellery pulled off her helmet. 4 hostiles neutralized, 1 technical destroyed, Marines extracted safely. Rodriguez whistled low. "Danger close work. 70 meters. His grin widened. "Damn, you're ice cold, ma'am." Ellery didn't smile. She just nodded and headed toward the debriefing room, her boots crunching on the tarmac. Ice cold. That's what they called her when she did the job right. The debriefing was routine. She walked the intelligence officers through her engagement timeline, marked the coordinates on the tactical map, estimated enemy casualties. The major running the session, a desk officer named Kessler who'd never flown combat, asked the usual questions. Weapons expenditure, fuel consumption, collateral damage assessment. He didn't ask if she was okay. Didn't ask if the danger close gun runs had rattled her. Didn't ask anything that suggested he saw her as anything more than a flying gun platform. When she was dismissed, she walked to the female berthing area, a converted shipping container with 4 bunks and a single flickering fluorescent light. 2 of the bunks were empty. The other female pilot in the squadron, a captain named Torres, was deployed to a different fob. Ellery sat on her bunk and unlaced her boots. Her hands moved automatically, muscle memory. She was exhausted, but sleep felt distant. She kept seeing the thermal images, the insurgents moving toward Webb's position. The moment before she fired, the way they just stopped existing. She'd killed people tonight, more than a dozen probably. The math was simple, their lives or Webb's team, but simple didn't mean easy. It never got easy. She lay back on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow there would be another brief, another mission. Another chance to prove herself to people who'd already decided she didn't belong. But tonight, 4 Marines were alive because she'd been in the right place with the right weapons and the right skills. That had to be enough. It had to be. She closed her eyes and let the exhaustion take her. 3 days later, Ellery was walking across the flight line when she saw him. Staff Sergeant Webb, his arm in a sling, talking with a group of Marines near the maintenance hangars. He spotted her at the same moment. For a second they just looked at each other across 30 meters of scorching tarmac. Then Webb broke away from his group and walked toward her. Ellery stopped, waiting. She kept her expression neutral, professional. Webb stopped a respectful distance away and came to attention. "Captain Vale." "I wanted to thank you properly," Ellery nodded. "You already did, Sergeant, over the radio. I know, but I also wanted to apologize." That caught her off guard. She studied his face, young, sunburned, with the kind of exhaustion that came from too many firefights and not enough sleep. "For what?" Webb's jaw worked for a moment. "For what I said about you sounding different, about not expecting. I was out of line." Ellery kept her voice even. "You were surprised. Most people are." "Yeah, well, they shouldn't be." Webb looked down, then back up at her. "You saved my life and the lives of my Marines. You put round 70 meters from our position without hesitation. I've worked with Air Force CAS before, and I've never seen anyone fly like that. Gender doesn't mean a damn thing when you're that good. Ellery felt something shift in her chest. Not validation, she didn't need his approval, but recognition. Acknowledgement that her skill mattered more than her voice. "Thank you, Sergeant." Webb hesitated, then extended his good hand. "My whole team wants to meet you. Buy you a drink when we're stateside, if that's okay." Ellery shook his hand. "Focus on healing up first, then we'll talk." Webb grinned. "Yes, ma'am." He walked back to his Marines, and Ellery continued toward the hangar where her Warthog was being serviced. The crew chief Rodriguez was elbow-deep in the starboard engine, his uniform stained with hydraulic fluid. He glanced up as she approached. "She's ready to fly, Captain, just finishing the post-flight checks." Ellery ran her hand along the Warthog's fuselage, feeling the rivets and panels beneath her palm. The A-10 was ugly, brutally functional, designed in the 1970s and still flying because nothing else could do what it did. Low and slow, absorbing punishment, delivering precision violence when it mattered most. It was underestimated just like her, but it got the job done. "How's the GAU-8?" Ellery asked. Rodriguez grinned. "Still the most beautiful gun ever mounted on an aircraft. You put almost 300 rounds downrange the other night. Textbook shooting." Ellery nodded. "Let me know when she's ready. I've got another sortie at 1400. Rodriguez wiped his hands on a rag. "You know, Captain, some of the other pilots were talking. They said you're the best CAS pilot in the squadron, maybe the best in the theater." Ellery's expression didn't change. "They say that to my face or behind my back." Rodriguez's grin faded slightly. "Does it matter?" "Always." Rodriguez met her eyes. "To your face, ma'am, at least the ones I heard." Ellery allowed herself a small smile. "Then I'll take it." She walked away from the hangar back toward the operations center. The sun was brutal, turning the tarmac into a shimmering mirage, but she didn't mind. This was the life she'd chosen. The next mission brief was at 1300 hours. Ellery sat in the back row of the operations center, her notebook open, pen ready. The room was full 12 pilots, various support staff, the squadron commander at the front. Major Carver was a veteran F-16 pilot, 43 years old, with a thick mustache and the kind of confidence that came from 1,000 flight hours. He ran a tight brief, professional, efficient. But Ellery had noticed the way his eyes skipped over her when he assigned missions. The way he paired her with the least experienced wingman as if she needed babysitting. Today's tasking was routine, two-ship formation, flying armed overwatch for a convoy moving through the Sunni Triangle, low-threat environment, Milk Run. Carver assigned her a wingman, a fresh-faced lieutenant named Briggs who'd arrived in-country 2 weeks ago. She caught Carver's eye as the brief ended. "Sir, request to speak with you privately." Carver glanced up from his notes. "Make it quick, Vale." The other pilots filed out. When the room was empty, Ellery stood and faced him. "Sir, I've flown 66 combat sorties. I've logged more danger-close CAS than anyone in the squadron. Why am I getting paired with the newest pilots for low-threat missions?" Carver's expression hardened. "Because you're a capable pilot and I need someone experienced to bring the new guys up to speed. With respect, sir, that's not developing me. That's sidelining me." Carver set down his pen. "You have a problem with my assignments, Captain." Ellery held his gaze. "I have a problem with being underutilized. I didn't join the Air Force to fly babysitting missions." Carver leaned back in his chair. "You've made your point. Noted. Dismissed." Ellery walked out, her jaw tight. She knew how this worked. Complain too much and you were difficult. Stay silent and you were invisible. There was no winning move, just the choice of which losing position to occupy. She flew the convoy escort mission that afternoon. It was uneventful, 4 hours of slow circles over desert highway, watching Humvees crawl south toward Baghdad. Briggs was competent but green, asking too many questions over the radio. She walked him through the procedures, patient and professional. When they landed, Briggs thanked her effusively. "That was amazing, Captain. I learned so much." Ellery just nodded. "Good, stay sharp." That night she lay in her bunk and stared at the ceiling. 66 missions. How many more before they stopped questioning her? How many more lives saved before her competence was assumed rather than surprising? She didn't have an answer, so she closed her eyes and tried to sleep. And the next morning she woke up and did it again. Because that was the job, not the flying, not the fighting. The job was proving herself every single day. The operation's tempo increased as summer deepened. More missions, more danger-close gun runs. More nights where Ellery came back with her hands shaking and her flight suit drenched. She didn't complain. She didn't falter. She flew every sortie like it was her first and her last with precision that bordered on obsessive. Slowly, grudgingly, the respect started to come. Not from everyone, not all at once, but in small moments. A nod from another pilot, a quiet good work from the crew chief. The way Webb's Marines talked about her when they thought she wasn't listening. 2 months after the Serpent's Throat mission, Ellery was flying armed reconnaissance near Fallujah when the call came in. A convoy was hit, followed by small arms fire. 3 vehicles disabled. Casualties mounting. Air support requested immediately. Ellery was 12 minutes out. She pushed the throttles forward, the Warthog's engine screaming as she climbed and then dove toward the grid coordinates. The convoy was strung out along a narrow highway, black smoke rising from the lead vehicle. She could see muzzle flashes from the buildings on the east side, insurgents firing from covered positions. The convoy commander's voice was clipped, professional, barely masking the panic underneath. Any air, this is Guardian 1-6. We are taking effective fire from multiple positions. Urgent CAS requested. Ellery keyed her radio. Guardian 1-6, Reaper 3-6, A-10, I'm 3 minutes out. Authenticate Bravo Tango. Authenticated Reaper, we need you now. Ellery toggled her targeting pod, scanning the buildings. The insurgents were smart, firing from windows and rooftops, using the structures as cover. Danger close work. Precision required. She armed her cannon. Guardian, I need you to mark your position with smoke. Any color. Purple smoke billowed from the convoy's rear vehicle. Ellery adjusted her approach, lining up on the eastern buildings. The reticle settled. Her thumb hovered over the trigger. She exhaled slowly and fired. The GAU-8's roar echoed across the desert. 30-millimeter rounds punched through concrete and rebar, chewing apart the building's facade. Dust and debris exploded outward. The muzzle flashes stopped. Ellery pulled up, rolled left, and came around for another pass. She made 4 gun runs in 6 minutes, systematically dismantling the insurgent positions. By the time she broke off, the convoy was mobile again, racing toward the safety of the forward operating base. The convoy commander's voice came over the radio, breathless with relief. Reaper 3-6, that was incredible. You just saved our asses. Ellery didn't reply immediately. She was watching her fuel gauge, calculating playtime. Finally, she keyed her mic. Copy, Guardian, get your people home safe. She climbed to altitude and turned back toward base. Her hands were shaking now, adrenaline crash setting in. She flexed her fingers, willing them steady. This was the part they didn't show in recruitment videos. The part where you came down from the high and realized you just killed people. Necessary, justified, legal, but still. She landed 20 minutes later, taxied to the hardstand, and sat in the cockpit for a long moment before shutting down the engines. The silence was deafening. Rodriguez was waiting as she climbed out. Good sortie, Captain. Ellery pulled off her helmet. They're alive, that's what matters. Rodriguez nodded. Major Carver wants to see you, said it's important. Ellery's stomach tightened. She walked across the base to the operations center, her flight suit still damp with sweat. Carver was in his office reviewing mission reports. He looked up as she entered. Captain Vale, sit down. She sat. Carver folded his hands on the desk. I've been reviewing your mission logs. 68 sorties, 32 danger-close engagements, 0 friendly fire incidents, 0 collateral damage assessments. Ellery waited. Carver's expression was unreadable. That's exceptional work, Captain, she nodded slowly. Thank you, sir. Carver leaned back. I'm recommending you for a Distinguished Flying Cross. The convoy you supported today, Guardian 1-6, that was a senator's son commanding that unit. You saved his life and the lives of 11 Marines. That's going to get attention. Ellery felt something cold settle in her chest. A senator's son, of course. That's what it took. Not the 67 other missions, not the countless lives saved, but one person with the right last name. Carver must have seen something in her expression because his voice softened slightly. I know what you're thinking, but that's not why I'm recommending you. I'm recommending you because you're the best CAS pilot I've ever seen. The senator's son is just the reason other people will pay attention. Ellery met his eyes. With respect, sir, I don't want recognition because I saved the right person. I want it because I'm good at my job. Carver smiled, a genuine expression that caught her off guard. Then you'll get both. Dismissed, Captain. She left his office feeling off balance. The recognition should have felt good. It should have felt like vindication. Instead, it just felt like another hoop to jump through, another box to check, another reminder that her competence wasn't enough. It had to be witnessed by the right people. She walked back to her berthing container and sat on her bunk. Her hands were still shaking. She stared at them for a long moment, then clenched them into fists. She'd earned this. Every bit of it. If it took saving a senator's son for people to notice, fine. She'd take the attention and use it to prove herself even further. The next morning, she flew again. The Distinguished Flying Cross ceremony was scheduled for 3 weeks later, back at the main base. Ellery flew her missions in the interim, professional and precise as always. The other pilots started treating her differently. Not with mockery, not with skepticism, but with something closer to respect. She didn't trust it yet. Respect was earned through consistency, not a single medal ceremony. The day before the ceremony, she was called to the operations center for an urgent tasking. Another ground unit in contact, another desperate radio call, another chance to prove herself. She suited up without hesitation, walked to her warthog, and climbed into the cockpit. This was who she was, not the medals, not the recognition, just the work. The engines roared to life. She taxied to the runway, received clearance, and took off into the burning desert sky. Below her, someone needed help. Someone was counting on her, and she would not let them down. The mission was a blur of radio calls and targeting solutions. A Marine unit pinned down in an urban area, insurgents using a mosque as a firing position. Complicated, politically sensitive, dangerous. Ellery threaded the needle, putting rounds through windows with surgical precision, avoiding the mosque structure, neutralizing the threat without creating an international incident. The Marines extracted safely. The mosque stood intact. And Ellery flew home with her fuel tanks nearly empty and her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip the stick. She landed, debriefed, and collapsed into her bunk. The next morning, she put on her dress uniform and stood at attention while a general she'd never met pinned the Distinguished Flying Cross to her chest. There were cameras, reporters, a speech about courage and excellence. Ellery stood still and let it happen. When it was over, she shook the general's hand, saluted, and walked away. Outside the ceremony hall, Webb was waiting. His arm was out of the sling now, and he was back in full gear. "Congratulations, Captain," Ellery nodded. "Thank you, Sergeant." Webb hesitated, then said, "My team's rotating home next week, but before we go, we wanted to give you something." He pulled a small patch from his pocket. It was a custom designer warthog silhouette with the words Reaper's Marines stitched beneath it. Webb's voice was quiet. "We all got one made, everyone you've saved. We figured you should have one too." Ellery took the patch, her throat suddenly tight. She stared at it for a long moment. "I don't know what to say," Webb smiled. "You don't have to say anything, ma'am. You already did everything that mattered." He saluted and walked away. Ellery stood alone in the hallway, holding the patch. For the first time in months, she felt something other than exhaustion. Not pride exactly, not vindication, just recognition, real recognition from the people who mattered. She tucked the patch into her pocket and walked back to the flight line. Her warthog was waiting, freshly serviced and ready to fly. She climbed into the cockpit, strapped in, and ran through her pre-flight checks. The engines started with their familiar growl. She requested clearance and received it. And then she took off, climbing into the clear desert sky, heading toward another mission, another chance to do the work she was born to do. Below her, the desert stretched endlessly. Above her, nothing but blue. 6 months later, Ellery rotated back to the States. She'd flown 93 combat sorties. She'd saved more lives than she could count. She'd earned the respect of Marines, soldiers, airmen who'd watched her work. But when she arrived at her new duty station, a training base in Nevada, she walked into the briefing room and saw the same skeptical looks. the same surprised reactions when she spoke, the same questions about whether she could handle the stress. So she started over, proved herself again. Flew training missions with the same precision she'd flown combat, taught new pilots the skills that had kept her alive, and slowly, grudgingly, the respect came again. It was exhausting, demoralizing, infuriating, but she didn't quit. She couldn't, because somewhere someone was going to need close air support. Someone was going to be pinned down, outgunned, desperate. And when that call came, she was going to answer. That was the job, not the medals, not the recognition. The job was being ready, always. 3 years after her deployment, Ellery was promoted to major. She took command of an A-10 squadron, the first woman to do so. The ceremony was small, professional. She gave a brief speech about excellence and readiness. Afterward, a young female lieutenant approached her. The lieutenant looked nervous, hopeful. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say, you're the reason I joined. I saw your story, and I knew I wanted to fly warthogs." Ellery studied the young woman's face, saw her own determination reflected back. "It's not easy," Ellery said quietly. "You'll have to prove yourself every day. Some people will never see past your gender. You'll work twice as hard for half the credit." The lieutenant nodded. "I know, ma'am, but you did it, so I can too." Ellery felt something shift in her chest. Not pride, not vindication, just the quiet recognition that maybe, finally, the work she'd done mattered beyond the individual missions. That maybe she'd changed something, opened a door, made it easier for the ones who came after. She extended her hand. "Then welcome to the fight, Lieutenant. I'll teach you everything I know." The lieutenant shook her hand, grinning, and Ellery walked away, heading toward the flight line where her warthog waited. The sky was clear. The air was still, and somewhere someone needed help. She climbed into the cockpit, strapped in, and started the engines. The familiar growl surrounded her. She requested clearance and received it, and then she took off, climbing into the blue, ready for whatever came next. Because that was who she was, not a barrier breaker, not a trailblazer, just a pilot, a damn good one, and that had always been enough. Below her, the desert stretched endlessly. Above her, nothing but sky. And in the cockpit, Captain Ellery Veilcall, signed Reaper, flew on, armor split but fighting, proving herself one flight at a time. The work was never finished. The fight was never over, but she was ready. She had always been ready, and she would keep flying until the day she couldn't anymore, because that was the job, and she was the best person to do it. The end was just another beginning, another mission, another chance to prove that competence didn't have a gender. That skill spoke louder than skepticism. That when someone sent a final plea for help, she would dive back in every single time. The warthog climbed higher, the engines roared, and Ellery smiled.